The German government's collapse will be complete on Sunday when voters in the country go to the polls and become the latest to throw the bums out. Frustration is at an all-time high, and it is still boiling over in a lot of places beside Germany. The reality of the situation is pretty simple. The economy there, as everywhere else, has been bad, and contrary to all assurances and promises, it is not getting better. But here's the thing, another dirty secret. Changing governments is nowhere near enough to turn everything around. This goes so much deeper than politics. The uncomfortable truth is that governments can't fix this. None of them. Everyone keeps looking to officials for answers they don't have. This should be abundantly clear now, coming up on 2 decades of constant top-down intervention. This economic policy followed by that one and then the one after. They never work because the problem isn't a policy matter. But policies are all governments have, so they're going to keep serving them up anyway. It's the illusion of control, and it is one of the worst ones. In fact, it was this which led to the state of the world that we have now. Governments that are exercising more and more control as they claim more and more economic territory that voters have been giving them for years. The worse it is in private economy, the more governments will spend and tax and borrow and redistribute, and the more voters will demand of it, all at the expense of the private economy, which only ever gets worse. Meanwhile, the government gets bigger and more powerful, and everyone cheers as it does. Economic depression is what opened the door for the all-powerful state, encouraged from every side because it's all labeled as stimulus. The economy isn't working, give us more stimulus, then more stimulus. And because it doesn't work, it doesn't solve anyone's problem. Stimulus goes from a rare emergency use to ever present, meaning government has an open door into every facet of the economic system, all in the name of stimulus. Voters demand of them when they demand governments do something about the horrible economy. But here's the worst part of all of that. Getting rid of the stimulus, getting government out of the economy, that doesn't fix the original problem either. Government policies were initially a response to the problem, so eliminating the policies merely gets us back to square one. We still have the economic problem. Like I said, this goes way deeper than politics. If there's only one thing for certain, it's that stocks are going to soar anyway. Whether the election results in this or that, stocks love policies. The media loves policy. Central bankers love policies. We're all taught to love policies. But why? Where's this love from policy coming from? It's from an acknowledgement, whether we realize it or not, the economy is not performing. And we're looking for somebody to provide answers. And those somebodies that we look for answers, they don't have them. But it is understandable why there's been optimism over these election results. From a very simple perspective, it seems like if things have been going wrong for the last several years, then get rid of the people who have been in charge over the last several years, especially as those people in charge continually deny that there has been any problem to begin with. So if they keep saying the economy's just fine, all of a sudden they're out of office. And once they're out of office, there's understandably a mini boomlet in optimism, a surge in positivity, because if we get rid of the old guys, maybe the new guys can somehow figure things out. We saw that in Germany. In Germany, the ZEW just released its sentiment indicators, commercial sentiment, where expectations jumped to 26.0, plus 26.0 from 10.3 in January. Not only is that the highest since last summer, it's the biggest 1-month increase in a couple years. And the reason was, according to the ZEW president, this rising optimism is probably due, more likely due, to hopes for a new German government capable of action. He also said, though, after a period of absent demand, private consumption can be expected to gain momentum in the 6 months because of what they expect of lower interest rates boosting demand, which it never does. Again, policies, always looking for policies, as well as a seasonal upswing in sentiment that happens every year, and it never pans out. In other words, every time something comes along and sparks a little bit of optimism, it doesn't last. It isn't sustained. There is no economic recovery because the issue isn't whatever temporary thing that has commercial people or consumers responding to. As Bloomberg wrote in response to the ZEW results, the economy has been at the center of Germany's election campaign. There's some truth, with the likely next chancellor, Friedrich Merz, promising to rekindle growth by reducing taxes, regulation, and social handouts. Europe's biggest economy contracted for a second straight year in 2024 and is expected to tread water in 2025. From an economic perspective, those pro-growth, business-friendly policies sound like they could potentially be a game changer. But all they're doing is rearranging the decks on the Titanic. Germany's economy didn't contract for the 2 previous years, and it's not looking like it's going to contract this year because of the policies that were pursued by the previous administrations. Those certainly didn't help, and removing those policies might help a little bit, but it still leaves us and leaves Germany, the rest of the world, because this isn't just about Germany, with the same problem. And Germany's the best example of the forgot how to grow economy. The fact that it doesn't look like a recession or a traditional recession, yet it absolutely is. And in fact, the results of the election that the Germany's having is a perfect example of how the lack of economic growth actually does produce really bad results in all facets of life, not just in terms of the real economy. But here's what they said about the election, the latest from the election. Scholz's government fell apart after he and the Greens tried to loosen rules that limit government borrowing, and the fiscally hawkish finance minister, Christian Lindner of the FDP, pushed back. Because, again, we're taught to believe that if the economy is not performing, governments are going to come in and fix it. So Scholz wanted permission from the fiscal hawks to be able to borrow more and more and more, to basically do what every other government around the world has done, even though what every other government around the world has done hasn't worked. Instead, it's just government expands and the private economy doesn't. Scholz wants to tap more debt to fund the transition to a low-carbon economy, fix outdated infrastructure, and accelerate the adoption of digital technologies, none of which is really government's purview. This is private economy stuff. But we're so deep into the silent depression era of the last 20 years, all of this sounds perfectly normal to people. There was a time when the idea of accelerate the adoption of digital technologies as part of the government would have been laughed off the stage. That's what private economy is supposed to do. Yet now we look to central authority, to central plan a recovery they have no ability to actually plan, let alone execute. How is changing the government in Germany going to boost demand from China or around the rest of the world? How is it going to restart trade between the United States, Japan, and everyone in between? Where is there going to be demand for oil, where oil prices would be going a lot lower given where demand actually is? You see what I'm saying here? Governments are offering solutions to problems that they have no ability to solve. Instead, all they're doing is throwing up policies and borrowing more money and attaining more power because the economy is bad. And people are looking for them to provide answers that, again, they do not have. But we have this problem of looking to government for everything, including money itself. And I just went over this at Eurodollar University's deep dive analysis, Zimbabwe's experience with trying to impose a gold-backed currency on the country. And it exposes a whole bunch of monetary myths, including the idea that governments are in charge of money and they direct it. We're having a President's Day sale at Eurodollar University where you can get subscriptions to the deep dive analysis as well as the other ones, the daily briefing and Eurodollar University memberships, all for incredibly low prices. Today's the last day of the sale, so I highly recommend you check it out. The prices, the information, the details, all available at our website, eurodollar.university. And all this follows another mistaken impression that this is not really related to the economy to begin with, when it absolutely is. The Europeans, like the Americans and central bankers everywhere, have been selling everyone the idea that the economies have all recovered from 2020, the pandemic, the lockdowns most of all, and the supply shock. When the truth of the matter is, the entire world was impoverished, coming off of a decade, the silent depression, when growth was completely absent. So we got impoverished by price changes after a decade of being impoverished by lack of economic progress. It is a perfect recipe for further disaster, and one that governments have continued to take advantage of. Even those who have been hardest hit by these economic circumstances that only get worse, not better, even those who are hardest hit, they're conditioned to look to the capital, to look for government to solve their problem. We need more stimulus. The economy's not creating jobs. Incomes are not keeping up with prices. More stimulus, more stimulus. It's in the financial media. It's in central bankers. It's from Politicians themselves. Some politicians have seen the light and said, we need to try a different direction, but that, as we'll see, only gets us back to square one in the initial problem. But either way, we are conditioned to look to governments to solve all these economic issues that can only be solved from the private economy perspective. Here's Reuters. Europe's largest economy contracted for a second consecutive year in 2024, its worst performance in 2 decades. And the city, which I'm not going to pronounce, has been among the hardest hit. It has Germany's highest unemployment rate, which has fueled a dramatic rise in the popularity of the AfD party. Ahead of the general election on Sunday, a national debate is raging about how to revive Germany's economic fortunes. And almost all of them are saying we need government to do this and we need government to do that. And here's an example. The guy that they've singled out to focus the story on says he hopes a new government will provide long overdue infrastructure investment needed to rebuild Germany's energy system and transition to a greener, more modern economy. Germany has pledged to become carbon neutral by 2045, and none of that's going to actually help. It's not the lack of government investment that is holding back Germany's economy. They ain't going to fix the private economy by going carbon neutral in the next couple decades. It's all a bunch of distractions, nonsense. The uncomfortable truth about government and government stimulus in particular is that it's not supposed to solve the actual underlying economic problems. That's been lost in all of this too. We've been used to one stimulus after another, and if you have to do more than one, it doesn't work. But we've been used to it for so long, nobody stops and asks, what is this supposed to be accomplishing? That's true in everywhere it's been tried, and it's all of the examples that we have to choose from, not just Japan from a couple decades ago. How about China right now? The perfect example of a stimulus-heavy regime in a centralized planning top-down framework. It doesn't produce any of the results. Stimulus is not even intended, and its proponents will tell you this, as I'll get to in a second. Stimulus is not even intended to fix the underlying economic problems. It is at best hoping to limit the damage from it. But government spending, government activities, it's all waste and inefficiency. Governments are the least productive redistribution engines. That's all stimulus really is. It's resource allocation from government officials who are doing things for non-economic reasons, which means they're not going to be sustainable. They're prone to waste and inefficiency. They're highly prone to corruptions as well as political biases, which Germany is a perfect example of that as well. So government redistribution, even taken on its best terms, is really only meant to raise what they call aggregate demand. And raising aggregate demand simply to buy time and lower the pain threshold while the private economy actually fixes itself. If you keep doing stimulus because the private economy is not fixing itself, you shouldn't keep doing stimulus. You should say, why isn't the private economy fixing itself? You look at something like Germany's industrial production, which is the most depressing statistic in the entire Western world, and you can see why. German industrial output has collapsed essentially to 2010 levels. And it has collapsed to 2010 levels for a couple of different reasons, but most of all, the economy of the 2020s never recovered from the pandemic, the lockdowns, and the supply shock, after the economy of the 2010s never recovered from the monetary crisis, there's a huge clue, in 2008. Just look at industrial production in Germany. Yes, it's been declining for years, but look where the latest downturn began. March of 2023, that month when a bunch of stuff happened in the banking system, in the monetary system that nobody wants to talk about and everybody wants to just bury, sort of like what happened in 2008. But as I said, government stimulus is not intended to replace the private economy. Even the Keynesians, the most Keynesian person you could ever imagine, Paul Krugman, he wrote an article in the New York Times in 2015 where he basically spelled out what the Keynesians are attempting to do. So here it is from the horse's mouth. He says in 2015, I would summarize the Keynesian view in terms of 4 points. Economies sometimes produce much less than they could and employ many fewer workers than they should because there just isn't enough spending. Such episodes can happen for a variety of reasons. The question is how to respond. And it isn't just because spending doesn't happen. That's what the Keynesians believe. 2008 was not a shortfall of spending. It was a shortfall of money. But continue with Krugman. There are normally forces that tend to push the economy back toward full employment. That's what a recovery is for. But they work slowly. Not always. A hands-off policy towards depressed economies means accepting a long and unnecessary period of pain. That's what stimulus is supposed to do. Even taken on these terms, what Krugman is laying out here, stimulus doesn't solve the economy. It's already fallen off. The whole point is to reduce the pain of the downturn which was caused by the problem in the real economy in the first place. As he continues, it is often possible to drastically shorten this period of pain and greatly reduce the human and financial losses by, quote, printing money, using the central bank's power of currency creation to push interest rates down. And you already realize that's completely backwards and completely wrong. And one reason why recoveries tend to not happen the way that they used to is because interest rate stimulus doesn't actually stimulate anyway. But even here, the point of stimulus is not to fix the economy, it's to reduce the pain from the problem that the economy is suffering from. Finally, though, sometimes, number 4, sometimes, however, monetary policy loses its effectiveness, especially when rates are already close to zero. That's what mainstream economists all believe, and they're wrong in that too. In that case, temporary deficit spending can provide a useful boost. And conversely, fiscal authority in a depressed economy imposes large economic losses. So you can see what he's recommending. When the economy falls down, people look to the government for answers. They don't have an answer to why it fell down. All they can provide, again, taking the stuff at face value and assuming it works the way it's supposed to, all they can provide is to shorten and maybe shorten the length of and reduce the depth of the contraction that happens anyway. That's what stimulus and that's what government spending is supposed to do. But and the reason why Krugman wrote this article in 2015, if governments continue to have to reduce the pain for their efforts of a bad economy year after year after year after year, the answer is not to provide more stimulus or to look for governments to solve a problem that they're clearly not solving. It's to look at why the problem isn't being solved and why stimulus isn't really actually reducing that much pain. And one of the myths that Krugman was attempting to address in this article, he says, Keynesians, this is the myth, Keynesians always favor deficit spending under all conditions. And give him his point here because it's truth. Not all Keynesians believe that the government should be spending. We've been conditioned to believe that because of what he says next. The case for fiscal stimulus is quite restrictive, requiring both a depressed economy and severe limits to monetary policies, which monetary policies don't do anything because they're not really monetary policies, they're interest rate policies. And as he said in 2015, that just happens to be the world we've been living in lately. And it would continue to be the same world all the way up until 2020. And then 2020 added even more pain to that depressed world by impoverishing everyone else beside. So government stimulus, even from the proponents of government stimulus, is not meant to solve the problem. But that's not how it's sold to the public. But here's the last uncomfortable truth. Getting government out of the stimulus business, doing all the things that Mertz said, or even Trump for that matter, that's not enough to fix the economy. While it can help reduce the waste and inefficiency and the lack of productivity that governments do provide and enforce on the economy through their resource allocation attempts, their bad resource allocations and attempts and biases, while that can help, it still just gets us back to square one. Stopping the stimulus that doesn't stimulate doesn't fix the overall economic problem. And what is the overall economic problem? Look at any chart of GDP or any macroeconomic statistic you like, and it gives you the answer right away because it all goes back to 2008. 2008 was not about subprime mortgages. It was about a monetary system that broke down and has never been fixed. But in this world where we look to central banks to fix everything with QE and stimulus, nobody's looking in that direction. So stopping the spending won't magically get the economy restarted. Government didn't break the economy, so getting government out of it won't fix what's wrong. And the more we defer to governments and want them to fix the problems that they can't possibly fix, the more they're going to tell you they have all the answers in their toolkit. You just need to give them more and more authority. They've been piggybacking off of this situation, taking more power away from, not just in economic circumstances, obviously, but all over the spectrum, but piggybacking off of these depression circumstances to take more and more and more. And at the same time, voters are more and more willing to give them the authority, let them spend, even encourage them to borrow and spend because they don't see a way out of this mess. 2008 broke the economy. We can't get that back. The silent depression shows up everywhere. But the one constant through it all, beside the fact that the economies they've completely sucked the entire time, is that governments have a plan. They have a plan, and it doesn't work. Then they have another plan, and it doesn't work. And we keep expecting the next government to have another plan. The issue here is not policies. Policies are not going to fix it, because policies are not the reason this thing went wrong. Why was Paul Krugman in September of 2015 feeling the need to defend stimulus and Keynesianism? Because it doesn't work. It's not supposed to work. It is not a way to fix this big, massive problem. Governments don't have the answers. They just pretend to. And we need to get out of the habit of looking to them every time something goes wrong, because all they're going to do is what they do best. They're going to lie to you. Everything that I've been talking about, policies don't fix the economy. That's what bonds have been telling us from the get-go. Policies come and policies have gone, but interest rates behave the same way. And that's what we went over in the video link below. As always, thank you very much for joining me. Check out our President's Day sale. Today's the last day. Thanks to Eurodollar University members and subscribers. And until next time, take care.